Over the last few years, we've seen a trend of classic 90s strategy games being revamped and re-released, and sometimes these new versions breathe new life into the game's community, and other times they crash and burn. But regardless of how good the product actually is, the marketing always follows a similar pattern. The release is advertised as the same game you know and love, modernized and enhanced to give you the best possible experience on newer hardware. Unfortunately, Heroes of Might and Magic 3 HD Edition is one of those that doesn't really live up to its promise, and of the thousands of people who still play Heroes 3 every day, even over 20 years on from its original release, the vast majority would tell you not to buy HD Edition. This video is going to detail why that is and what the alternatives are, so if you're still looking to play this game, you can hopefully get the version that suits you best. Generally speaking, most people who enjoy PC gaming have a positive opinion of Steam, and for many of us, the Steam store is the first place we look when shopping for a game. So it's understandable that I still see comments on a regular basis from people who've recently bought the only version of the game currently available on Steam, which promotes itself as a better version of the classic game. These people then find themselves confused when they see other players talking about various different features and quality of life improvements that they don't seem to have access to on HD Edition. In Ubisoft's defense, the first line of the product description does say the game is based on the original game, which is called The Restoration of Erathia, but not many buyers will actually read that and understand what it's really saying, that HD Edition is based on an outdated version of the game, with neither of its well-known expansion packs included. Supposedly, the reason the expansions weren't included was because their source code was lost, but then in 2017, someone who helped with the translation for the original game actually found the source code for the expansions on their hard drive and sent it back to Ubisoft. But then nothing happened because HD Edition had already been quietly abandoned by its publisher. It's actually kind of embarrassing how often HD Edition's loading screens remind you to speak English when using the online lobby, when it never really got the support it needed for that lobby to succeed in the first place. Before we get into the detail of exactly what's missing, we should clarify that there are really two versions of the base game which are still regularly purchased today, which are Heroes 3 HD Edition and Heroes of Might and Magic 3 Complete, which is also known as Heroes 3 Shadow of Death after the final official expansion for the game. While Complete Edition isn't available on Steam at the time of recording, you can buy it from other sources, often at a very low price on sale, and that is the version of the game we will be comparing HD Edition with. So let's delve into the number one problem with HD Edition, which is that it's missing both of the game's original expansions. Beginning with Armageddon's Blade, it's hard to overstate just how much of the game's replayability comes from the features that were added in this expansion. For one thing, it adds the random map generator, which enables you to select a map size, a number of players, starting town, and so on, and no two maps created using this feature will ever be exactly the same. They have certain templates and patterns in common, but you never know exactly what you're going to get. As you can probably imagine, this plays an absolutely huge role in keeping things interesting and fresh, especially for players who've literally been returning to the game on a regular basis since as far back as 1999. Then there's also the addition of the Conflux town, which is based on the 4 types of elemental magic, and admittedly the town was considered overpowered at the time for various reasons, and still is if you don't play with mods, but you'll struggle to find a player who genuinely thinks the game would be better if Conflux wasn't included. Having 9 factions instead of 8 gives you that one extra variable to help keep each playthrough feeling slightly different. And then, especially for players who enjoy single player, the expansion also adds 38 new standalone scenarios and 6 new campaigns. So even without taking random maps into account, this expansion alone more or less doubles the number of playable maps that you have available to you. On top of that, the expansion adds 13 new types of neutral creatures, including the most powerful creature in the game, the Azure Dragon. And there are several other quality of life improvements, like the ability to reactivate map objects with the spacebar, which can save you from getting trapped by powerful creatures on the other side of a subterranean gate or a monolith, which you otherwise won't actually know are there until it's too late. The second expansion, Shadow of Death, didn't add as many features, but it does represent the final official version of the game, meaning a great many of the hundreds of maps uploaded by the map-making community over the years to websites like Maps for Heroes are only compatible with this version of the game. And that's a big deal because some of the maps published by the community over the years have been incredible, and arguably even more unique and enjoyable than the maps in the original game. Similar to Armageddon's Blade, Shadow of Death also includes another 38 standalone scenarios and 7 new campaigns, as well as a new game mechanic which enables you to create combination artifacts. Before we go into other issues with HD Edition, and there are some major ones, I will mention a couple of things about it that I genuinely think are quite good. Firstly, it's currently the only version of Heroes 3 with Steam integration, so if you're somebody who enjoys playing games within Steam's ecosystem, or somebody who enjoys unlocking Steam achievements, HD Edition does give you that. However, even if you do fall into that category, it's hard to imagine it could ever be enough to make up for some of the missing features. I'm willing to admit I personally enjoy trophies and achievements in games. Even if they are just hoops for people to jump through, it can be nice to have a record of things you've done. In fact, that's one of the reasons I made this channel in the first place. I've wiped my high score board in Heroes 3 several times. It's just one of those things that's gone as soon as you reinstall things between PCs, or if you're trying out new mods. And although I don't really play HD Edition, it is nice that it keeps track of how many maps and campaigns you've won. But now we come to HD Edition's main selling point and the question of, does it actually look better than the original game? Some players will disagree with me here, but I think the short answer to that question is yes. The original Heroes 3 is 800 by 600 pixels, and it hasn't really aged well in terms of graphics. HD Edition goes up to 1920 by 1080 pixels, which is also increasingly out of favour, but on today's monitors it does look a lot crisper than the original game. But there are two caveats to that, and one of them is pretty huge. We'll start with a fairly minor thing, which is some of the updated artwork feels a bit rushed. It's pretty clear the way HD Edition was made was they would scale up the original images, but some of the art feels slightly off compared to the original game. For example, some creatures like ogres have been smoothed out to the point where they almost look a bit too pointy, a bit too smooth around the edges. You can tell they've been kind of glossed over instead of being recreated on a more pixel by pixel level. And there are several hero portraits where I personally think the features look a little bit distorted or just a bit off. And it's usually most noticeable in their eyes, like for example, sometimes a hero's eyes seem to be pointing in slightly different directions, and there's also this weird aesthetic where you can almost never see the whites of the hero's eyes, so when you look closely, a lot of them have this weird bloodshot look, like they're really tired or stressed or maybe something else. It's possible that that's simply a reflection of how they looked in the original game, but in the original game, the hero portraits were only about 60 pixels wide, so you can see why there wasn't much detail in their eyes. But in HD Edition, it all feels a little bit rushed. You get the feeling the bar wasn't really set that high for the redesign, and it was just a case of scale them up and round them off. There are one or two portraits where it does look like time was taken at a more pixel by pixel level, but these are the exception rather than the rule. And when you're remastering a game which is considered a classic by its community and still heavily played after 15 years, there's a good argument for putting the time in and not rushing things. That was always going to risk HD Edition being seen by some as a bit of a cash grab, and that's exactly the way many long-term fans perceive it. But then we come to the second major problem with HD Edition, which is a lack of support for the game's most popular mods. If for some reason you're completely against installing mods on your game, HD Edition might actually be the best version for you. But for the vast majority of players, the resolution scaling provided by the HD mod, which shouldn't be confused with HD Edition, makes the game look so much better that the improvements from HD Edition become fairly insignificant. And the HD mod already existed before HD Edition, so when HD Edition came out, players weren't comparing it to the original game, they were comparing it to the original game plus the HD mod. But the HD mod also does a lot more than make the game look better on higher resolutions. It features optional extras like quick combat, a battle queue which is especially helpful for newer players, it adds new hotkeys to the game which makes managing your armies about 10 times faster, and it fixes bugs and generally streamlines the game, to the point where trying to go from HD mod to HD Edition just makes the game feel a bit too sluggish, and it's hugely noticeable to me as a non-hardcore player, and for the game's really hardcore fans, it's borderline unplayable. The HD mod also features an online multiplayer lobby which, unlike the lobby in HD Edition, actually has players in it. It also has some interesting features like allowing players to take their turns simultaneously, which keeps going until the players encounter each other. Obviously it goes without saying that this feature in particular is only going to exist for as long as the servers for it continue to be funded by the community, but at the time of recording there's no sign the lobby will be closed down in the foreseeable future. Another absolutely huge reason lack of mod support is an issue for HD Edition is that you won't be able to download the Horn of the Abyss mod. For anyone who doesn't know about Horn of the Abyss, it's a mod that essentially tries to add new content to the game in a really professional and tasteful way that almost feels like an official expansion. And it does such a good job of that most longtime players literally do treat it as an official part of the game, only really ever going back to the vanilla game if they feel like playing a specific map designed for that version. So let's give a brief summary of everything you'll be missing out on if you don't feel like using this mod. Firstly, you've got the Cove Town. This is a pirate-based faction, generally considered to be quite well balanced. Then you've got a second town coming called Factory, which is a more technologically advanced town, based in the more recently added Wasteland terrain. Then there's the Highland terrain, which serves as the new base for Conflux and includes many new types of map objects. There are 3 new map sizes above extra large, namely huge, extra huge and giant, several new campaigns and many new standalone maps, many new artifacts, rebalancing of secondary skills to provide a more genuine sense of choice, and a subtle rebalancing of towns like Conflux and Necropolis, which are widely considered overpowered in the original game. For example, Conflux can now only produce 3 phoenixes per week instead of 4, and Necropolis now needs to get around twice the number of kills in order to produce the same number of skeletons as in Shadow of Death. And those are just the features added so far. The final version could still be several years away. There are also less well-known mods available too, for example one I've personally been meaning to try called the Succession Wars, which essentially mixes the art style and creatures from Heroes of Might and Magic 2 with the updated game mechanics from Heroes 3. It's a really interesting idea for players who enjoy both of those games.
Okay, Nora from the future here. I recorded most of this video a long time ago, but there is one point I wanted to add in. There is actually one mod for HD Edition I have been impressed by. It's called the HDE mod and isn't very well known. And while I always encourage caution when downloading little known mods, it is an open source mod that's been around for a few years, and I've used it myself without trouble. I would describe it as being similar to the HD mod for Complete Edition, but with more bare bones features. For example, you can hold Control and left click to instantly break several 1-stacks from a bigger stack, which saves a lot of time, and there are some other useful hotkeys as well. It also adds in the ability to use the spacebar to repeat interactions with objects, which solves one of the missing features I mentioned earlier. There are some other features I haven't tested as much, like increased frame rate, and the ability to generate random maps, although the latter does rely on files from Complete Edition anyway, so it's really for a niche audience that uses both versions. Overall, although it mostly feels like a worse version of the HD mod, it does solve some of my biggest gripes with HD Edition, and it is a palatable middle ground for those who want features from both. I'll link where I got it in the description, although of course I can't guarantee links will work forever, so if they're not working, you might need to try searching online for the HDE mod for HD Edition. And with that out of the way, let's get back to the script.
I can understand buying HD Edition if it's on sale and you already own Complete Edition, but if you don't already own a copy of the game, then Complete Edition is almost always what you should look to first. If you still want to buy HD Edition, that's entirely up to you. For a small minority of players, particularly those who don't want to download mods from a third party, it might be the best version of the game available. But I do think the majority of people buying it, and many people still are, simply haven't been told the downsides, and if that was you, I hope this video has given you the information you need to make a more informed choice. Thanks for watching, do go ahead and subscribe if you'd like to see more content, and I'll see you next time.